What's the emergency?
No problem. All units are
Hi,
by
I'm
34
at
with
the
the
corner of
149
Pleasant Hill and John Young Freeway.
1519 East 18.
Rochester, New York, the early 1970s, a city defined by its factories, small businesses, and close-knit neighborhoods. The kind of place where kids walked to school, played outside until the streetlights came on, and everyone seemed to know your name. But from late 1971 to late 1973, this sense of safety was shattered. 3 young girls, Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowicz, and Michelle Maenza, were abducted in broad daylight, seconded, and murdered.
Each victim's first and last names began with the same letter, and each was found in a town which name shared those initials. It's this unnerving pattern that earned the case its names: the alphabet murders, or the double initial murders.
Over 50 years later, these crimes remain unsolved. Police have investigated more than 800 suspects, chased leads across the country, and even revisited evidence with modern DNA technology. Still, the question hangs in the air: who killed these girls and why? To help us navigate this dark chapter in true crime history, we're joined by someone who's not only studied the alphabet murders in depth, but also brought the story to thousands of viewers in her own investigative video.
She's known for her detailed research, compelling storytelling, and her commitment to keeping cold cases alive in the public consciousness.
From the Crime Stands Still channel on YouTube, Kerrie Droban, welcome to Crime Solvers Central.
Thanks for having me and profiling this important case. I've dedicated quite a bit of time and research to retelling this grim whodunit because it's important to keep the victims top of mind, no matter how many decades have passed. These were real girls and real families, and there's not a day that has passed where they haven't grieved and wondered and searched for answers. And it's the hope, of course, that by keeping the cases in the news, so to speak, it will reach a new audience, trigger fresh memories, and maybe compel someone, somewhere, to come forward.
Absolutely. I love that. And that is what makes today's discussion so important. So let's start by painting a picture of Rochester back then, before we walk through the cases.
Rochester in the early 70s was a working-class city. Kodak, Xerox, Bausch & Lomb were major employers. People took pride in their neighborhoods. Kids had independence. They ran errands alone, biked for miles, and played unsupervised.
The concept of stranger danger didn't exist the way that it does today. Families assumed that children could handle a quick trip to the store or a walk home from school on their own.
And that is really key to understanding the first abduction in this case. So in 1971, it wasn't unusual to see a child walking alone in the middle of the afternoon unaccompanied. Parents didn't worry really about stranger danger, and the idea of a child predator was pretty unthinkable. And just to give your listeners some perspective of the juxtaposition, parents should have worried because in 1971, that was a dark transitional year in American crime. It was the year before Watergate broke in 1972. Manson had just been convicted. In 1971, there were at least 5 active serial killers wreaking havoc in the United States, among them the Zodiac killer, who was still taunting police with ciphers. I mean, 1971 is just before some of the biggest shifts in forensic science and behavioral profiling. There was no DNA database. FBI did not even begin using DNA profiling in criminal cases until 1988, and the National CODIS DNA database wasn't even launched until the mid-90s. So DNA fingerprinting wasn't even discovered until 1984. So in 1971, your forensic evidence meant fingerprints, ballistics, hair, fiber analysis, but not DNA. So investigators really had to rely on eyewitness testimony and just dumb luck.
My goodness, I had no idea. I'm just, as you're going down the list of everything that was happening and what a pivotal time that was, I'm just almost speechless. That's crazy.
Mhm.
So let's talk about, the the abductions and how this all kind of started and came to be in November 1971, actually November 16, and talk about the actual abductions and later on, murders that happened that day. 10-year-old Carmen Colon leaves her grandmother's house, right? She's going to the pharmacy just a block away from what I read to pick up a prescription. She's lively, outgoing, like she's well known in the neighborhood. Everybody knows this child. I also read and heard that she actually picked up the prescription, like it was verified that she made it to the pharmacy, picked it up, but then never returned home.
It is said that she enters the pharmacy, is told the prescription isn't ready, and then leaves. Not long after, drivers on Interstate 490 witnessed something horrifying. Carmen, naked from the waist down, sprinting along the shoulder, waving desperately for help.
And no one stops. I mean, this is heavy rush hour traffic. There are dozens of eyewitnesses. And there's a car driving in reverse on the shoulder with a little girl screaming, running down the shoulder half naked. So this is the bystander effect. I mean, it's like a stoplight stuck on yellow. Everyone hesitates, waiting for someone else to move first until tragedy barrels through the intersection. I mean, most of the United States at this time, if you can remember or recall, still lacked a central emergency number. Right? Full nationwide coverage didn't come into play until the 1980s and 1990s. So on the street, people could only use coin-operated payphones. So before 911 was universal, most people just dialed the telephone operator and asked to be connected to the local police department. So it wasn't easy to come out of that bystander frozen moment.
Well, yeah, and if you're on a freeway, what are the odds that there's just going to be a payphone right there? You know what I mean? If this was a regular street where there was maybe a convenience store, there were typically payphones there, but it really would have taken somebody stopping, getting out of the car, and like taking action. Like you said, unfortunately, that didn't happen, and 2 days later, her body was found in a gully near Charlottesville, about 12 miles from Rochester. She was strangled, suffered fractured skull, spinal injuries, and she did have defense wounds that would indicate or show that she fought back.
And police did question her uncle, Miguel Colon, who recently bought a car matching witness descriptions. His vehicle is found scrubbed clean inside and out. A doll that belonged to Carmen is inside, but without forensic links, it's circumstantial. And 4 days after the murder, Miguel leaves for Puerto Rico.
I think it's natural to first look at family members, especially in a dysfunctional family like Carmen's. I mean, she lives with her grandparents, but her parents are still in the picture. And Carmen's mom's boyfriend is Miguel. So, despite his cryptic message in the days following Carmen's death, where he literally says, "I did something wrong in Rochester and I needed to skip town," he's questioned much later, but passes a polygraph, and so he's released. And there were several suspects, by the way, who police administered polygraphs to. And just a word about polygraphs. If you're a person without conscience, without guilt or remorse, you're going to pass that polygraph, right? But even if the police suspected Miguel, it's pretty apparent that he is not the one who left a message on the door of a public restroom in a local department store, which literally said, "I killed a 10-year-old girl. Who will be next?" I mean, police dusted for prints, but they came up empty, and at that time, there were no security cameras in 1971.
My goodness, I didn't know either one of those things. And no, I think in looking over this and learning more about the cases, my first thought was also like, oh, well, at least skip town. Yeah, easy, guilty conscience. And so that's immediately where my mind went. I had no idea about the message on the inside of the restroom stall. So that's very interesting. So, victim 2, there's more. On April 2nd, 1973, 11-year-old Wanda Walkowicz leaves her home to buy groceries at a local deli. I think also very common back then for kids. I'm of a similar age and I did similar things. And she was last seen carrying a heavy paper bag along Conkey Avenue.
Yeah, and a brown vehicle is said to have pulled alongside her. Then the next day, her body is found in Webster, about 7 miles from her neighborhood. She had been sectioned and strangled with a ligature, and then redressed after her death.
Another important link that Wanda, like Carmen, is wearing a red coat and she's running errands for her mom. So both girls are running errands and wearing red coats, and they're abducted in broad daylight by an individual driving a beige or tan car. I mean, that's pretty striking in and of itself.
I have a quick question, a bit off script. I've seen this in a few different things that I've read about this specific child being redressed. Do you read anything into that? It seems important if it continues to be, it's mentioned, it's something that's called out.
Right. Whenever somebody is redressed like that, it shows premeditation and planning and some kind of ritualistic activity by, the killer. I mean, he goes to great pains to do that, even after he sucks at them. So it's the posing and the staging, which is part of his signature. I mean, another weird link to this is that they find white cat hair on some of the clothing of the girls. And that, of course, becomes a really important clue because it's starting to link the two together, right? I mean, they don't own a cat, so you have to assume the killer owns the cat, right?
Mm-hmm. And then also the fact that the autopsy revealed that she had ate custard or ice cream or something shortly before her death, suggesting that her killer stopped to feed her, maybe to calm her or gain her trust. But I'm like, okay, the killer fed her, the killer redressed the child or dressed the child after. I find those things very interesting. And do you feel the same way or think the same way about them feeding the child as you do about the redressing, that it's part of that? Or do you think maybe they were trying to gain trust or calm them?
So I think the feeding detail is pretty interesting. I mean, I think it shows not only control and domination, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a way to infantilize the victim. I mean, these are just theories, but if a killer is like the parent or the provider, right, in the child's eyes, they're more
Mm-hmm.
likely to be trusted. It could also be sharing food is sort of ritualistic, right? It's like the Last Supper, right? The killer sharing the Last Supper with his victim. It's a very warped sort of ceremony before death, if you will. It's very interesting. It can also represent communion, a sacrifice, a sort of twisted intimacy. There's all kinds of I know I'm going off on tangents, but I think it's sort of that humanization before dehumanization of the victim, and so it's a very strategic, calculated thing. I mean, this isn't a random thing where he decides to feed his victim, right? I mean, the killer might want to quote unquote know their victim in a strange sort of distorted way before he destroys them, right? So it's sadism at its core, but um, watching a victim eat, knowing what's coming next sort of heightens that sense of suspense for the killer, right? I mean, that's also part of the killer's modus operandi, if we will. I mean, he does it in at least two of the murders. We haven't gotten to the third one, but we don't know if he did it with Carmen. I mean, that's a detail that we just don't know. So it's very interesting, but I think it is very calculated. It creates suspense in his eyes, and of course, it ups the ante for him. I mean, it's part of his ritual.
And I did want to mention as well the fact that I think that you mentioning that the suspense plays a part in it. I very much believe that that's probably a bigger part than we might be giving credit to, because at the same time that he fed these victims, he also redressed them, and I think it's a way of extending the experience for him,
Uh-huh.
of making the experience longer. And in the case of Wanda, especially, there was a moment where witnesses had seen a man forcing a red haired girl, which was matching Wanda's description, into a light colored Dodge Dart. And police circulated this lead, but no solid suspect came about. No, there was no follow-up to that specific case. And the similarities with the other two really make that frustrating.
Definitely. And then later in November, no, actually November 26, 1973, 11-year-old Michelle Maenza, she leaves to go to school to retrieve her mother's purse. No, she leaves school. Hold on, let me start that all over again because I just botched that as bad as I could. Rewind. November 26, 1973. 11-year-old Michelle Maenza, she leaves school to retrieve her mother's purse from a nearby plaza. She's last seen by classmates crying in the passenger seat of a beige or tan car.
Then 2 days later, her body is found in Macedon, 15 miles from Rochester. And like Wanda, she was strangled with a ligature and redressed. The same exact, it was the same exact pattern as with Wanda. And again, white cat fur was on her clothing.
Yeah, it's really, they're interesting links. Investigators also find a partial palm print on her neck and leaf fragments in her hand, which suggests that she was killed near where she was found. The stomach contents again show that she'd eaten a hamburger with onions shortly before her death, which is another parallel to Wanda's case and another possible link between the cases. So it's interesting because it does suggest that the killer was familiar with the area, not overly concerned about getting caught either, as he's taking the girls to familiar locations that are presumably occupied with lots of witnesses who could identify him, right? So he's more focused and fixated on the ritualistic killing of his victims and the alliteration of the names, right? He's really focused on Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowicz, Michelle Maenza, and he drops the bodies in towns that have the same initial. So that really seems to be a part of his psychological signature, and that's what he is more focused on than really being identified.
Yeah, so let's examine the common threads here. So all victims were preteens abducted in broad daylight from Rochester. All had the double initials with bodies found in matching towns. All were strangled and seconded. And cat hair appears in 2 cases, maybe the third, or definitively not the third. Do we know?
I think we don't know. I think it's possible.
Okay. Possible. It's possible. So possibly 3.
Yeah. And there are a number of differences, very important differences, which might indicate a number of things. And I think almost one of my theories personally is that perhaps this killer was getting into a routine, a modus operandi. And the differences would be that Carmen's murder was much more violent, blunt force trauma, and signs of an escape attempt were involved. Wanda and Michelle's cases share the feeding pattern, and it's possible that they had the same offender's DNA on them.
I think that's why some of the investigators initially split the cases. I mean, I am thinking that there were 2 separate killers, but I actually think that was a mistake because the working theory was that Carmen was possibly killed by someone that she knew, and that Wanda and Michelle maybe were killed by the same predator. But if the double initials is the killer's signature, then there's no way that Carmen Colon was a one-off, in my opinion. I mean, I tend to believe that the killer evolved, that Carmen was his mistake or his learning curve, but not even likely his first, which is even more troubling if you think about that. And I think that some of the important clues, were missed in Carmen's case because there was a rush to judgment and they thought Miguel was the killer. So, we may never know whether or not Carmen was his first because, he may have struck at much earlier time, as he was identifying his urges. I mean, we don't know whether he fed Carmen either, right? Because there was no autopsy. There was no witnesses came forward. That detail really didn't come out until the other 2 murders. The killer likely lived or worked locally. So blending into his environment, if you will. I mean, we know this because he had a car And by the third murder, he was growing really confident. I mean, maybe there was a change in his living situation. I mean, we just don't know. But I do think that these patterns, these initials, these, dumping the bodies in the towns with the same initial, all of that's very calculated and really telling that this was one killer.
So let's take a look at the major list of suspects, the main suspects. So we've got Miguel Colon, Carmen's uncle, fled after the murder, died by suicide in 1991. Dennis Termini, firefighter and serial rapist, owned a beige car and had cat hair in it, ruled out in Wanda's case by DNA. Kenneth Bianchi, later the Hillside Strangler, lived in Rochester, worked near the abduction sites, no forensic match. Joseph Naso, California double initial killer, lived in Rochester in the early 70s. DNA didn't match Wanda's case.
We do have a number of possible suspects, but every single promising lead ended up in disappointment. No charges, no closure.
The killing stopped after Michelle's death. Theories range from the killer dying, moving, or being jailed for another crime.
The Monroe County Sheriff's Office still considers this an open case because homicides have no statute of limitation. And so advances in DNA and genetic genealogy have continued to solve decades-old murders. As more and more people contribute to the DNA database, there will be increases in catches. That's the hope, anyway. These unsolved cases affect generations. It's psychological wounding that doesn't magically heal. And even when the killer is identified, there is really no closure for the victims' families. There is awareness and knowledge and solved mystery, but the grieving continues.
And all they have to work on is hope. There is still hope. And for the families, hope is all that's left. And for the city of Rochester, the alphabet murders remain a wound that's never healed. I think that the advancements in DNA might be the key to unlocking this case, just because we don't know for sure where those DNA samples were taken from or how they were matched to the people that they were trying to connect the case to.
That is a very, very good call out and valid point. So that is the case history. Coming up next, we're going to dig into the investigative gaps, psychological profiling, and the theories that might finally point to the person responsible.
Rochester was the kind of town where people knew your name at the corner store, where factory jobs paid the bills and kids played until the streetlights came on. But in the fall of 1971, the city learned something dark, that evil could hide behind familiar faces and walk the same sidewalks.
Kerrie, when Carmen's murder hit the headlines, how did the community react? Was there a shift in everyday behavior right away?
No, I mean, I think the first response was shock, disbelief, denial. There was sort of a paralyzing fear, but in 1971, crimes like Carmen's were still thought to be rare occurrences, right? These were freakish, something that happened to other people, a wayward relative, an inside job. I mean, this idea of child predators, of random murder, it wasn't something that people were willing to embrace yet. I mean, it wasn't until the second or third kill that alarms really started to ripple through the community. I mean, now the violence wasn't random, so daily routines started to change. Kids would walk in groups with chaperones and patrols. There were quasi-curfews as darkness fell. So those were some of the initial changes that started to happen.
And I do think that in the case of Carmen, they probably immediately went to a family member as a possibility instead of connecting it to what they would know to be a future number of serial cases very similar to hers. And looking at Carmen's case in specific, the fact that multiple motorists saw her on the highway and no one stopped, what does that tell us about the missed opportunities in those first crucial hours?
I think in Carmen's case specifically, I mean, you have the bystander effect going into place. I mean, there was a lack of reporting for hours. The dozens of motorists who just passed it off, they didn't they didn't really have an opportunity, really. I mean, if they were going to chase this car, I mean, the car's going in reverse. No one gets a license plate on that freeway. I mean, and they're stuck in rush hour traffic. So these were not cars speeding along the freeway. They literally were stopped enough to be able to take a license plate. There's one witness that, turns to his passenger and thinks, maybe we should report it, but then decides not to until hours later, and he goes home and reports it to his wife, but neither one of them reports it to police. It's not something that is startling enough for them to really get beyond that first hesitation, right? All eyes are on immediate family members. They think this is an internal thing. I mean, even Carmen's own family doesn't report her missing for 48 hours. The pharmacist who fills the, prescription doesn't report it immediately either, when Carmen doesn't return 30 minutes later to pick it up. So there are all of these missed opportunities initially, right? I mean, now we have Amber Alerts, we have social media, we have cell phones. I mean, our radar is on high alert, and it's almost hyper-vigilant now, right? We almost expect criminal activity if we were to see a scene like that today. I mean, what a paradigm shift, right? I mean, how many of us, when we see a child with an adult walking in the mall now, or eating a fast food restaurant, or playing at our arcade game, don't have that sort of like flicker of alarm register where we ask ourselves, does this situation look right? Right? And how many of us would take that one step further and express our concern to another person? And it's like we're afraid to be wrong.
Yes, absolutely. I think if we were to fast forward and it wasn't 1971 and it was 2025, there's a good chance this person would have been caught by now. Like you said, because we have cell phones. There's cameras, not just on street corners, but like everywhere. You can't go anywhere without being monitored, even if you think maybe you're not. In my mind, there's a camera everywhere I go. So I think, it was an extraordinarily different time. Um, so with the matching of the initials, the first and last names, in your research, do you think that the matching of those initials with the towns that they were found in was by coincidence or deliberate?
But see, I don't believe in coincidences. I think
Mhm.
that, this killer didn't just find his victims. I think he curated them. I think he stalked neighborhoods he knew well because he was familiar with the place. I think he watched girls who fit a certain visual and symbolic profile. I think that he likely approached more children than he harmed, actually, but he only acted when the initials and the location and the opportunity lined up.
It does make a lot of sense. In both Wanda and Michelle's cases, their autopsies showed that they'd eaten shortly before death, as we previously discussed. Now, how do you interpret that detail? We've gone into it a little bit, but how do you feel about that detail specifically?
I think it's a really important detail because I think it really sheds light on the killer's profile. And I know in the 70s, profiling was not a thing yet. But if you're looking in retrospect at this, it's a really important detail because it shows how he's taken care to to position himself in such a way as to gain the trust of his victims. He's not worried about people seeing what he's doing because his mind is so focused on the ritual of what he's doing. So it's a way to calm and sedate his victim, maybe delay that interaction, build a suspense for him because it's all about, the thrill of the capture, really. I mean, he abducts these girls in broad daylight, he feeds them, and he has to know the girls are terrified. So while they're consuming this fast food, they are expressing to him their terror. And in that way, that's sort of, he's getting off on that. That's part of his whole MO. So I think it's a really important detail. I mean, that and the initials, but it's part of his um I don't wanna call it seduction, but it's part of his MO in getting these girls to come with him.
So want to talk about the cat hair found and what the significance of that clue is. And something just kind of hit me in this moment because I keep going back to the cat hair, right? And we're talking about ways that maybe the killer was working to try to make the girls comfortable a pet. We always talk about, don't go with the person offering you candy or who has a cute puppy. I'm like, a kitten, a cat would make me comfortable. I love animals. So I don't know why that just hit me. I'm like, I'm also starting to wonder now because I kept going back to the cat hair. I'm like, well, that could be another way to make a child comfortable, earn their trust with a cat and or kitten. But what do you think the significance of that clue is?
Yeah, I think that's a huge awareness because it is part of. I would guess that that is part of his MO because it appeared on at least two of the cases. And again, we don't really know what happened in Carmen's case because so much evidence was not preserved and people weren't looking for that necessarily. So it could very well have been there and they just missed it. But I think the significance of the cat hair is huge, not only because it may have been part of his ploy, right? Part of getting the girls to trust him or come with him. We don't know. But it also links the cases. I mean, it would be too much of a coincidence to think that, in two murder cases, you have white or off-white cat hair on these coats, not to have, thought that they must be part of the killer's, repertoire, part of his MO, because, it's not that DNA could have, um, tested. I mean, they didn't have DNA at that time, but they could have tested hair and fibers and things of that nature. And so it could have identified the cat, right? And the cat and narrowed down the scope of suspects who owned a cat like that. So it's definitely a significant clue, not only as to the killer's MO, but also, how he lured people to him and also, who owned a cat like that. It was huge.
Absolutely. And also the fact that we don't really know if the cat hair was the exact same on both of the victims. The assumption is that it was, but if there's no DNA testing done on both of the victims' clothing and what was found on them, there's no way to know for sure. But of all of the suspects, Miguel Colon, Dennis Termini, Kenneth Bianchi, or Joseph Naso, who do you think comes closest to fitting the profile of the killer?
Well, I know that Miguel was the first suspect, and it was hard to ignore him initially because Carmen was the first. So I think when you go, you immediately target a family member as the first line of defense. I think that's natural, but I don't think that he had the hallmarks here to continue as a predatory killer. So I would have ruled him out immediately. But there was a speculation, I think we've talked about it here, that the killer worked in a position of trust or somehow garnered trust, either through the cat or through feeding them. Maybe he worked as a security guard, a firefighter, and some of the suspects did match that profile. I mean, Termini did. He was a firefighter and a serial. But his victim profile was a little bit different. He went after, adult women, not children. I think that Joseph Naso would be my first pick. But DNA cleared him. So, could he have been a copycat? I mean, that's another phenomenon, copycat killers. I mean, he had a list of 10 names, and on that list, lo and behold, was Carmen Colon, but not the Carmen Colon in this case. I mean, it's just too coincidental, right? It's a different Carmen Colon because she was an adult, right? But his victims all had, first and last names. The alliteration was there. He lived in Rochester at the time of the murders. But, he's ruled out because of DNA. So I think he may have been a copycat. But that wrist print on Michelle's neck, I mean, matching Kenneth Bianchi, who was the hillside strangler. I mean, he seems to be the most plausible because all of the victims were strangled. They were at least, well, at least we know two of the victims were. He lives in Rochester at the time of the murders. He later becomes convicted as a serial killer with a pattern of targeting young women and girls, right? So maybe he moved on to adults at a later time. Maybe he started with girls. So we don't know. I mean, we know he's a sadist. We know he used manipulative tactics. His tendencies matched what we've later come to call the alphabet killer. His connection to the community would explain how he lured victims in. You know, I- the case remains unsolved, but I think that, you know, he may have been the most likely perpetrator and, possibly relocated, possibly moved on or evolved into a more adult profile. That's not unheard of. There are other similarities that may have matched it. So that would be my first pick.
Wow. And after you explain it, I think that would be mine as well. Um, so after Michelle's murder, the killings stopped. What's your theory on that and why?
So I think, again, there are several possibilities. Serial killers are known to have cooling off periods, right? Where they lay low, they perfect their craft, they move locale sometimes. Sometimes they change victim profile. Like in Bianchi's case, right? Might have shifted from girls to young women because there's something else that is attracting them. It's not necessarily the age. Sometimes they die, they get caught, or something happens to force them to interrupt their cycle. So, many serial killers lead double lives. We know this, right? They compartmentalize, they have families, they have jobs. So they have to juggle a lot at one time, and also keep their addiction hidden. Killing is their addiction. So it's their need that they have to satisfy. So, sometimes they'll have, years where they're not killing. So I think in this case, my theory is that he relocated, when the heat started getting too hot and, started to sort of change his victim profile a little bit. That's just a theory, but it explains.
It absolutely would explain it. Another possibility is just that perhaps whoever is responsible was caught on a different charge, and
Mhm.
that's why the murders stopped.
Yeah.
And it's also possible that the killer ended up moving. There are so many possibilities in these cases, but if you could go back and change one thing about the original investigation, what would it be?
Oh, wow. That's kind of easy. I think it would be evidence preservation. Um, I think that in this case, there was so much that was missed. The red coat, the red hair, preserving semen samples so that DNA, as it evolved, those samples could still be tested. Um, you know, Recording similar details in these cases. I think at the time, particularly because Carmen Colon's case was sort of, lost in that shuffle where they, zeroed in on one suspect and then realized he wasn't it. They lost a lot of time, a lot of traction on that investigation. So by the time, Wanda and Michelle come into the picture, these are years apart. So I think that had they preserved that better, had they really made, kept better records of some of these similarities, I think that, we could use modern technology to go back and sort of revisit some of that evidence.
So, for the people watching now, decades later, what role can the public play in a case like this?
Well, I think that people underestimate their own memories. We have so many resources and tools at our disposal now. We have whole communities. We have internet sleuths who make it their mission to solve cases. We're not hamstringed by political or internal jurisdictional battles that some agencies and law enforcement personnel are. We can freely share information. And so this is a 1970s Rochester case. And so most people from that town didn't move, right? They didn't relocate. They stayed put. They built families and communities, and they have generational memories. And so tip lines are always open. Even the smallest detail can help. And the odd neighbor, the coworker who abruptly moved away, the stranger who who had long, grimy fingernails, as was one of the key descriptions in our killer in this profile. You think about all the people in the diners, in these fast food restaurants that never came forward, all those people on the freeway. This, as I said, this is sort of generational. So, these were sensational crimes that happened in Rochester. So people talked about them. They kept them top of mind in the headlines. And so I think the whole reason to keep revisiting cold cases is that hope that somebody somewhere out there is going to come forward and offer even the slightest bit of information. They may not even think it's significant or important, but it may be a turning point. And so I think the more that we talk about it, the more that we keep the victims top of mind, the more chance there is that these cases can be solved. The Alphabet murders are not just about a killer who vanished. They're about the systems that failed to connect the dots and the voices that were silenced until now. We have Carmen Colon, Churchville, Wanda Walkowicz, Webster, Michelle Maenza, Macedon. So why bring this case back into the spotlight? Why do we care? Because someone somewhere still knows something. Because new DNA technology could finally reveal the truth. Because we now understand more about the behavioral patterns of serial predators. And because Carmen, Wanda, and Michelle deserve more than to be remembered only by the pattern of their names.
Yes, definitely. And in keeping those victims top of mind, before we close, I do want to circle back to the most important part of this story, and that's the victims: Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowicz, Michelle Maenza. They weren't just names in a case file, they're somebody's daughter, their sister, friends.
I mean, exactly. Each one had a unique personality. I mean, Carmen was spirited. She was lively. She was quick to laugh. Wanda was responsible beyond her years. People loved her. She loved helping at home. Michelle was gentle and shy and loved and spending time with her friends. I mean, these were people, these were not just a pattern or a mystery. And these girls should not just be a footnote, right? I mean, we all have given it a name. We've given their murders a name, the Alphabet Killers, right? Or the Alphabet Killer. But these were real people, and their families are hurting and suffering, and I think it's really important to keep that hope alive and to try to bring some kind of closure to them.
I agree. I think too often the killers and the suspects take more precedence in the public eye than the victims themselves do. And it's the victims who matter the most for their families. Every year that passes without answers is another year without closure. That's why it's important to keep this case in the public eye, and it's so it doesn't fade into the background of an unsolved mystery.
If you're watching this and you lived in Rochester or the surrounding areas during the early 1970s, or you knew someone who did, we need you to think back.
Maybe you remember a neighbor with a white or light colored cat, somebody who drove a beige or brown vehicle, a person who suddenly left town after 1973, or who seemed unusually interested in news about these cases specifically.
Sometimes it's even the most insignificant detail that will just break the case wide open again. I mean, even if you think it's small, um, put on your sleuth hat and come forward with even the smallest clue.
And if you have information about the murders of Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowicz, or Michelle Maenza, no matter how small, contact the Monroe County Sheriff's Office at 585-753-4178.
And you can also submit information anonymously through Crime Stoppers. And for those outside the region, you can reach out to your local police department and reference the Alphabet Murders cold case in Rochester, New York.
And of course, Crime Solvers Central is another way to get information out and to connect and share this specific episode so that the case stays alive. They share the details on social media, in your chat rooms. Awareness is powerful.
The Alphabet murders have haunted Rochester for over a half a century, but we've seen again and again in cases just as old that justice is still possible.
One name, one memory, one phone call could be the key. These families deserve answers.
And these girls deserve to be remembered more than just by their initials. They deserve justice.
From Crime Solvers Central, I'm Charlie.
I'm Jayce.
And I'm Kerrie.
Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and stay loud.